The quiet after the cannons. When the thunder of war faded, an eerie silence settled over the Pennsylvania hills. But locals soon whispered that the battle wasn't truly over. The fallen hadn't all gone. The quiet after the cannons, a true story from the haunted heart of Gettysburg. The summer of 1863 left a scar on the heart of America that never truly healed. When the smoke cleared over the rolling Pennsylvania fields, the town of Gettysburg was no longer just another dot on the Union map. It had become hallowed ground, soaked in blood and memory. More than 50,000 men lay dead, dying, or missing after 3 relentless days of combat. Horses bloated in the sun. The air hung heavy with gunpowder and decay. And in that silence that followed, in the lull after the cannon ceased, something else began to stir. Even before the burial crews arrived, strange stories began to ripple through the town. Soldiers and townsfolk alike whispered that not all who had fallen had truly gone. Some said they could still hear musket fire echoing at dusk. Others swore that shadowy figures moved across the fields long after midnight, their boots crunching on gravel roads that no longer led anywhere. To outsiders, these were just ghost tales, the imaginations of a town traumatized by war. But for those who lived among the graves and ruins, the silence of Gettysburg wasn't empty, it was alive. The first whispers in the fields. Weeks after the battle, a farmer named Solomon Myers returned to his property on Seminary Ridge, where the fighting had raged fiercest. His fences were gone, his barn riddled with bullet holes. When he walked the fields at dawn, he noticed something that froze his blood. There in the mist stood a line of soldiers, motionless, half visible, their faces pale and distant. They wore both blue and gray. For a long moment, Myers watched as they turned, lifted their muskets, and disappeared into the rising fog. When he told his story at the local tavern, the others laughed.
Letters from the dead. In the months following the battle, Gettysburg became a destination for the grieving. Mothers, widows, and brothers traveled from across the Union and the Confederacy to search for loved ones. Many slept in barns or camped near the graves, hoping for a sign, any sign, that their sons were at peace. One account from 1864 tells of Sarah Blackwell, a widow from Virginia, who came to find her husband, Corporal James Blackwell. She arrived just as the leaves began to fall, guided only by a faded letter he'd sent before the battle. Each evening, she lit a candle near the stone wall of Pickett's charge and prayed. On the third night, she claimed to hear his voice whisper her name, clear and sorrowful, drifting across the field. Locals helped her dig where she believed he lay. Beneath the earth, they uncovered a Confederate belt buckle and a Bible inscribed with the name James Blackwell. She returned home, convinced her husband's spirit had led her to him. The photographer's secret. By the late 19th century, Gettysburg had become a site of pilgrimage for veterans, tourists, and curious minds. Among them was William H. Tipton, one of America's earliest battlefield photographers. He spent decades capturing images of the monuments and terrain. But in his private notes, found after his death, Tipton confessed something extraordinary. He wrote that on multiple occasions, while photographing the slopes of Little Round Top, faint human figures appeared in his glass plates, men in uniform, standing still as if posing. Yet, when he looked up from his camera, the field was empty. He destroyed many of these plates, fearing ridicule, but one image survived, passed down through his descendants, a blurred outline of a man in a kepi cap, standing amid the rocks, looking directly into the lens. Modern analysts who examined the photo claim no evidence of tampering. The exposure was too quick to capture a human being in that light. Still, the face, faint but unmistakably sorrowful, remains. The battlefield.
A town that carries the past. The people of Gettysburg live alongside their ghosts. They walk to school past the same stone walls where soldiers once fought. They shop in buildings that still bear bullet holes in the brick. And sometimes, on cool summer nights, they swear they can hear the soft strains of a bugle floating through the air. A lonely sound that fades just as suddenly as it comes. The war ended, the nation healed, but here, in these quiet Pennsylvania hills, the echoes of sacrifice still linger. For Gettysburg is not merely a place where men died. It's a place where memory itself refused to fade, where history breathes, where silence echoes in the fields. Farmers and travelers began to hear the sound of phantom drums and marching boots at twilight. Were these just tricks of the wind, or the restless souls of soldiers searching for home? Echoes in the fields, the unearthly rhythms of Gettysburg's haunted past. There are places in America where history refuses to whisper. It echoes. And nowhere does it echo louder than in the quiet fields of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Long after the last cannon fell silent, and the soldiers of North and South lay buried beneath the soil, something uncanny lingered. For decades, locals spoke of a strange rhythm that drifted through the twilight air. The muffled roll of phantom drums, the tramp of unseen boots marching across the open fields. Some called it superstition, others imagination. But those who heard it, farmers, travelers, soldiers, widows, knew the truth in their bones. The Battle of Gettysburg had ended, but the army that fought it had not fully gone. The war that refused to end. The year was 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg had left the Pennsylvania countryside shattered and raw. Farms once green with corn and rye were now pocked with trenches, burned barns, and unmarked graves. Every breeze seemed to carry the smell of powder and decay. In the months that followed, farmers who tried to reclaim their land began to report strange occurrences. One evening, Jacob Klein, a dairyman from Emmitsburg Road, returned home pale and shaken. He told his wife that while repairing a fence at dusk, he heard the unmistakable roll of a snare drum, steady, rhythmic, coming from the distant ridge. When he turned toward the sound, the field was empty. Yet the noise grew louder, closer, until it seemed to pass right beside him. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Not a leaf stirred. At first, neighbors mocked him, blaming wind or echo. But then they began to hear it too. The Twilight March. By the fall of 1864, the phenomenon was well known across Adams County. Travelers on horseback reported hearing the crunch of boots on dry earth behind them, though no one followed. Soldiers visiting the battlefield said they could hear the low murmur of men, commands, whispers, the clink of rifles carried. The mystery of Reynolds Woods. In 1901, a group of visiting veterans organized a memorial march through the battlefield. Among them was Colonel Andrew Foster, a man known for his rational mind. He'd fought at Gettysburg and dismissed ghost tales as nonsense. On the second evening of the reunion, his group passed through Reynolds Woods at twilight. According to multiple witnesses, Foster suddenly stopped and removed his hat. He said softly, "Do you hear it?" The men strained their ears, and there it was, a slow, steady cadence of drums moving through the trees. They followed the sound for several minutes, expecting to find a reenactment or musicians nearby. But when they emerged into the clearing, the sound stopped. There was no one there, no footprints, no echoes, only the golden haze of sunset drifting through the trees. Later that night, Foster confessed that the rhythm was identical to his own regiment's marching pattern. He said, "It was the same beat we used the night before my men were cut down." He never spoke of it again. Scientific explanations and unanswered questions. Over the next century, skeptics and scientists tried to explain the Gettysburg echoes. Some blamed acoustics, the unique geography of the ridges and valleys where sound could carry for miles. Others pointed to the phenomenon of auditory mirages, where distant noises, such as trains or gunfire, were distorted by humidity and terrain. But these theories fell apart when the accounts were compared. The drum beats and footsteps were too precise, too rhythmic, and occurred only at twilight or dawn, hours associated with the beginning and ending of battle. Even modern park rangers have reported strange experiences. One ranger, stationed near Devil's Den in the 1980s, claimed he often heard a faint drumming just before dusk. He said, "It wasn't machinery or insects, it was cadence, the kind only soldiers keep." Audio investigators have since recorded unexplained low-frequency vibrations on the battlefield, patterns that mimic marching rhythms but have no physical source. The National Park Service never confirmed or denied the authenticity of the sounds, but to those who live nearby, it's a truth too consistent to ignore. The night of the centennial. On July 3, 1963, the 100th anniversary of the battle, thousands gathered for the centennial commemoration. There were speeches, fireworks, and reenactments. But when the crowds dispersed, a small group of spectators remained near Pickett's charge to enjoy the quiet night. Around midnight, the calm broke. From the far ridge came the unmistakable sound of marching feet, slow, synchronized, growing louder. The ground itself seemed to tremble. Several witnesses described seeing faint flickers of light. The woman in white. In the ruins near Cemetery Hill, a ghostly figure was often seen wandering with a lantern, a nurse who never left her post, still tending to the wounded more than a century later. The woman in white, the eternal nurse of Gettysburg. There are many ghosts said to haunt the fields of Gettysburg, soldiers, generals, and the echoes of cannon fire that never truly die. But among all the tales whispered through Pennsylvania's mist-shrouded hills, none has endured quite like the story of the woman in white, the spectral nurse who walks Cemetery Hill, her lantern glowing softly in the dark. For more than 150 years, she has been seen by soldiers, tourists, rangers, and locals, always the same, a calm, sorrowful woman dressed in white, her face illuminated by a faint golden light, her hands reaching out as if to comfort someone unseen. Some call her a ghost, others an angel, but those who have encountered her say she is something in between, a spirit caught between duty and eternity. The blood-stained hill. To understand her story, one must go back to the summer of 1863, to the days when Cemetery Hill became one of the most brutal killing grounds in the American Civil War. When the Battle of Gettysburg erupted, the small town became a massive field hospital overnight. Homes, churches, and barns were filled with the wounded. The Lutheran Theological Seminary overflowed, and every building near Cemetery Hill became a place of agony and prayer. Among the dozens of volunteer nurses who rushed to the front lines was Mary Elizabeth Carter, a young woman from Harrisburg known for her calm strength and unshakable compassion. Though not a trained nurse, few women were at the time, she had assisted doctors during smallpox outbreaks and knew how to clean wounds and comfort the dying. When the first waves of wounded arrived, she joined the medical tents near Cemetery Hill, where men cried for water, morphine, or mothers who would never come. Witnesses described her moving through the chaos, her white dress stained crimson, her lantern never dimming. Soldiers began calling her the Angel of Cemetery Hill. The Night of the Lantern. On July 2nd, the battle raged deep into the night. Confederate artillery from Benner's Hill rained fire upon the Union lines. The air was thick with
the modern encounters. As decades passed, the sightings continued, now reported by park rangers, historians, and tourists alike. In the 1950s, a caretaker at the Soldiers' National Cemetery named Henry Barlow swore he saw her during a foggy April night. He was locking the gates when he noticed a soft glow moving among the headstones. Thinking it was a trespasser, he approached with his flashlight, but the beam passed right through her. She looked real, he said in an interview years later, but her eyes were the saddest I've ever seen, like she wanted to help but didn't know how anymore. In the 1980s, a group of college students camping near Cemetery Ridge heard what they thought were footsteps approaching their tent. When they peeked outside, they saw a woman in a pale dress standing a few yards away, her lantern illuminating her face. She looked directly at them and then faded into the mist. Their photographs from that night showed nothing but a faint circle of light hovering above the ground. The hospital basement discovery. Perhaps the most chilling evidence came in 1993 during renovations at a building once used as a field hospital near Cemetery Hill. Workers found an old rusted lantern sealed behind a brick wall, alongside scraps of fabric and what appeared to be a locket. Inside the locket was a small portrait of a young woman and the initials M.E.C. engraved on the back. Local historians quickly connected it to Mary Elizabeth Carter, whose name appeared on early volunteer rosters from Harrisburg, but whose final resting place had never been found. The lantern was placed in the Gettysburg Heritage Center, where visitors and employees alike reported flickering lights and cold air near the display. Some even claimed that after closing hours, the faint smell of smoke and lilacs filled the exhibit room, the same scent Reverend Mills had described over a century before. Skeptics and believers. Skeptics argue that the woman in white is simply a blend of legend and wishful imagination, a symbol of collective grief turned into ghostly folklore. Psychologists note that traumatic battlefields often give rise to psychic imprints, echoes of strong emotion left behind by those who suffered there. In this view, the apparition is not a conscious spirit, but a replay of energy, the earth remembering what humanity forgot. But for others, that explanation falls short. Too many people from too many generations have seen her, and always in the same way: the lantern, the white dress, the silent compassion in her eyes. She is never malevolent, she never frightens, she simply is. The lantern still glows. Today, visitors to Gettysburg often join evening ghost walks along Cemetery Hill. The guides tell her story in hushed voices, and sometimes, as the group reaches the top of the hill, a faint light of the Eternal Regiment. At Devil's Den, visitors claim to see men in tattered gray uniforms appearing out of the mist, speaking, saluting, and vanishing before their eyes. Historians and skeptics alike came to investigate. The Eternal Regiment, the ghost soldiers of Devil's Den. There are places in America where the air itself feels heavy with history, where every rock, every shadow seems to breathe the memory of war. At Gettysburg,
That feeling reaches its peak in a place called Devil's Den, a boulder-strewn ridge on the southern edge of the battlefield. It was here, amid the chaos of July 2nd, 1863, that some of the fiercest fighting of the Civil War erupted, and where, according to generations of visitors, the soldiers never truly left. For more than a century, Devil's Den has been the setting for one of the most haunting and well-documented ghost stories in American history, the legend of the Eternal Regiment. Countless witnesses, from tourists to park rangers to respected historians, have reported seeing gray-clad soldiers materialize in the morning fog, salute silently, and fade back into the mist as if marching into another world. The Hill of Fire and Shadows. During the Battle of Gettysburg, Devil's Den became a death trap. The rocky outcrop, with its labyrinth of crevices and boulders, provided cover for Confederate sharpshooters from Texas and Georgia. They poured deadly fire down upon Union troops trying to advance across the open field known as the Valley of Death. Eyewitnesses later described the fighting there as a storm of lead and screams. Bodies piled among the rocks. The wounded cried out for water. The sun set red, as if reflecting the blood beneath it. When the battle ended, Devil's Den was so choked with the dead that the survivors called it the slaughter pen. Corpses lay unburied for days in the July heat. Local farmers and burial crews later recounted how the ground itself seemed to sigh when stepped upon, hollow from the graves hastily dug beneath the stones. That was where the story began. The first sightings, 1869. The earliest known encounter came just 6 years after the war. A photographer named Alexander Gardner, who had returned to capture images of the battlefield, reported seeing several Confederate soldiers walking between the rocks at dawn. He assumed they were reenactors or veterans visiting the site, until he realized their uniforms were in tatters, their faces pale and distant. He called out to them, but they did not respond. One lifted his arm in salute, and then, in Gardner's words, dissolved into the fog like breath upon glass. Gardner refused to speak publicly about what he'd seen, fearing ridicule. But his assistant later confirmed the story, noting that the air turned bitter cold, even though it was midsummer. The Devil's Den apparitions, 20th century reports. By the early 1900s, Devil's Den had become a popular destination for battlefield tourists. It was there that a new wave of sightings began. Visitors hiking the ridge at sunrise often described hearing muffled voices, metallic clinks, and the sound of boots moving across the rocks. Some claimed to see entire lines of soldiers emerging from the mist, men in worn gray coats with cartridge boxes slung over their shoulders. They would appear solid, walking purposefully across the boulders, then vanish within seconds. One of the most detailed accounts came from Samuel Reese, a Pennsylvania school teacher who visited Gettysburg in 1915. He wrote in his journal, "I saw 3 men standing atop the rocks, looking down into the valley. One turned to me, smiled faintly, and touched the brim of his cap. Then all 3 disappeared as though the fog swallowed them whole."
Historians step in. As the stories multiplied, historians and skeptics alike came to investigate. Some suggested that heat and humidity could cause mirages. Others believed that visitors' imaginations were influenced by the powerful emotions of the place, that trauma could imprint itself on the land like a scar. But even the skeptics admitted that something about Devil's Den defied easy explanation. Dr. Robert McLaren, a historian from the University of Maryland, conducted a study in 2005 using audio and electromagnetic sensors on the site. His team recorded faint rhythmic sounds like distant marching and inexplicable temperature drops near the rocks. McLaren stopped short of calling it proof of the paranormal, but he concluded there is measurable energy here. Whether it's geological, psychological, or something we don't yet understand, the battlefield still speaks. The Eternal Regiment returns. One of the most striking incidents occurred during the 150th anniversary of the battle in 2013. Thousands of visitors flooded Gettysburg for the commemorative events, including hundreds of Civil War reenactors. That night, as fog rolled over the valley, several reenactors camping near Devil's Den reported seeing another group of soldiers walking toward them from the rocks. Men in faded gray uniforms, their flags tattered, their faces ghostly pale. At first, they assumed it was another unit, but when the figures drew close, their eyes reflected no light. The air went cold, and then, as the men raised their hands to salute, they disappeared, leaving behind only the smell of gunpowder and the faint sound of boots retreating into the darkness. Even the most skeptical reenactors were shaken. One later said, "We've all played soldiers, but those weren't actors. They were the real thing, just not from our century." Residual energy or restless spirits. Paranormal experts call this kind of haunting residual energy, an emotional echo trapped in time, replaying over and over. But others believe the Eternal Regiment is not just a memory. Unlike typical hauntings, the soldiers of Devil's Den seem aware of their surroundings. Witnesses describe them making eye contact, saluting, even speaking a few words before fading away. When history refuses to die. Ghost hunters, Civil War buffs, and even park rangers began documenting sightings, cold spots, and voices caught on tape. What they found blurred the line between the living and the dead. The battlefield that wouldn't sleep. There are battlefields that became museums, and then there is Gettysburg, a battlefield that never truly went silent. More than 160 years have passed since those 3 days in July 1863 when 51,000 men were killed, wounded, or vanished into the smoke. The cannons have long been still, the fields neatly trimmed, and the monuments polished by time. Yet those who walk Gettysburg after dark often swear the war continues, just beyond sight, just beyond breath. Historians, soldiers, and even the skeptical have felt it, that chilling awareness that something remains, a whisper of commands, a shadow among the cannons, a presence that won't fade with the centuries. And for those who have studied this phenomenon, ghost hunters, battlefield historians, and even the National Park Service, Gettysburg has become something more than sacred ground. It has become a living archive of energy where history itself refuses to die. The first recordings, 1950s to 1970s. By the mid-20th century, the field of paranormal research had begun to take shape in America, but nowhere drew investigators quite like Gettysburg. In the 1950s, local radio host Edward Warren brought a reel-to-reel tape recorder to the fields near the wheat field, one of the deadliest sectors of the battle. He wanted to capture ambient sounds for a historical broadcast. When he played back the tape, he didn't hear wind or insects. Instead, he heard drums. Slow, rhythmic, and distant, the steady cadence of marching boots beneath a bugle's faint echo. Audio engineers examined the recording and found no signs of tampering. The site was empty when Warren recorded it. The nearest reenactment group was over 30 miles away. That tape, now archived in the Adams County Historical Society, became the first documented electronic voice phenomenon, EVP, at Gettysburg, the first whisper of proof that the battlefield might still be speaking. The rise of the ghost hunters. By the late 1970s, Gettysburg had become a pilgrimage site, not just for Civil War buffs, but for paranormal investigators from across the nation.
The stories were too many, the witnesses too credible to ignore. Groups like the American Ghost Society began conducting night vigils in known hotspots: Devil's Den, the Wheat Field, Triangular Field, and the Rose Farm, where hundreds had fallen. In 1983, an investigation led by Dr. Melissa Crane documented several phenomena still considered legendary in ghost research circles. Her team recorded sudden temperature drops of 20 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds, whispered voices captured on tape responding to direct questions, and most remarkably, the faint clinking of sabers, audible to all 7 witnesses present. Crane, a historian first and skeptic second, concluded, "If human emotion can leave an imprint, Gettysburg is the most recorded surface in the world." The park rangers who wouldn't talk until they did.
Where history bleeds through time. Some researchers believe what happens at Gettysburg isn't a haunting at all, but a phenomenon called time slip. According to this theory, intense emotional or energetic events like war can cause ripples in space-time, allowing moments from the past to replay or overlap with the present. This would explain why so many witnesses described not shadowy figures, but full-bodied apparitions, soldiers in motion, columns marching, cannons firing. In 2010, physicist Dr. Paul Reinhardt from Penn State conducted an experiment at Devil's Den using ultra-sensitive magnetometers to detect shifts in the Earth's field. His instruments recorded periodic bursts of electromagnetic energy that coincided with eyewitness reports of apparitions nearby. Reinhardt cautiously proposed that Gettysburg might be a natural echo chamber of time. He added, "We may not be seeing ghosts at all. We may be witnessing the past replaying itself in a loop of unimaginable trauma." Even seasoned investigators admit that no amount of data can prepare you for the moment you feel it. During a 2015 ghost hunt near the Rose Farm, a participant named Emily Carter, a historian from Virginia, was recording ambient sounds when her digital recorder captured something extraordinary. As she reviewed her files later that night, she heard a faint male voice whisper, "Mother, don't cry." Her hands trembled. The voice was followed by a distant volley of musket fire, none of which had been audible during the recording session. Carter said afterward, "It wasn't frightening, it was heartbreaking. It felt like the past was asking not to be forgotten." Many who visit Gettysburg say the same thing. The feeling isn't malevolent, it's mournful, like an endless echo of sorrow and duty. The science of the unseen. Despite thousands of eyewitness accounts, Gettysburg remains a riddle to modern science. Researchers studying infrasound, low-frequency vibrations that can affect human emotion and perception, have discovered that the valley's geography and air currents can amplify these tones, possibly explaining the uneasy feeling visitors experience. But even the scientists admit that infrasound can't explain full-bodied apparitions, voices answering direct questions, or the lingering smell of gunpowder that appears out of nowhere. Psychologists have theorized that the sheer collective trauma of Gettysburg may have left a psychological imprint strong enough to transcend time, that human consciousness itself is recording and
Legacy of the haunted ground. Today, Gettysburg stands as both a memorial and a mystery, a reminder that the cost of freedom can echo far beyond the battlefield, in whispers only the heart can hear. The ground that never forgot. There are places in America where the earth itself feels alive, places that seem to breathe the stories of those who came before. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, is one of them. Stand upon its rolling fields at dawn, and you feel it immediately. The hush before history speaks. The morning fog drifts like gun smoke. The air carries something older than memory, older than sorrow. You know, without being told, that you are walking on sacred ground. For 3 days in July 1863, this quiet town became the site of the bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil. More than 51,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing after the guns fell silent. And yet, for all the graves and monuments, many believe the battle never truly ended. Because here, on these haunted hills, the legacy of war still breathes. The battle that defined a nation. Before it became synonymous with hauntings, Gettysburg was the turning point of the Civil War, the moment when the Union hung by a thread. For 3 relentless days, Union and Confederate forces clashed in the fields and orchards surrounding the town. The heat was unbearable, the air thick with smoke and the cries of the wounded. On the second day, the fighting reached Devil's Den and Little Round Top, where soldiers fought hand to hand among the boulders. The third day brought the infamous Pickett's Charge, a doomed assault that left the fields strewn with bodies. When it was over, the town of Gettysburg was transformed into a graveyard. Every church became a hospital, every home a morgue. And yet, amid the devastation, something unseen seemed to take root, an energy born of courage, grief, and sacrifice. Locals swore that at night the air shimmered, as if the battlefield itself still burned with invisible fire. The ghosts that built the legacy. Decades after the cannons fell silent, Gettysburg's haunted reputation began to take shape. Farmers plowing their fields reported the smell of gunpowder rising from freshly turned soil. Travelers along Emmitsburg Road claimed to hear faint cries and the rhythmic tramp of phantom boots. Even more chilling were the reports from the children of Gettysburg. As early as the 1890s, local schools recorded accounts of students who saw soldier men standing quietly near their playgrounds, watching with sad eyes before vanishing into thin air. By the time of the battle's 75th anniversary in 1938, when surviving veterans returned to the field one last time, some swore they felt not just memory, but presence. One Union veteran, Samuel Dupree, told a journalist, "I could feel them with us, not the men still living, but the ones who stayed behind. They were there, proud, patient, waiting for us to remember them." Those words would echo through generations, a sentiment that would define Gettysburg's mysterious legacy. The modern pilgrimage. Today, millions visit Gettysburg each year, some to learn history, others to feel it. Tourists walk the same fields where soldiers once fell, stand before bronze monuments, and listen to guides recount tales of valor. But for many, it's what happens after the tour's end that leaves the deepest impression. At twilight, when the sun sinks behind Seminary Ridge, the town changes. The air cools, the birds fall silent, and the whispers begin. Ghost hunters describe sudden temperature drops, 20 degrees or more, with
The people who carry the memory. Every generation in Gettysburg grows up with the awareness that they are living on haunted soil. Farmers still find old musket balls and bone fragments when they till the ground. Park rangers walk paths where soldiers once bled, and local historians act not just as guides, but as caretakers of something sacred. Some townspeople even claim that their families have personal connections with the spirits of the battlefield. One woman, Nancy Wilcox, whose ancestors lived near Cemetery Ridge, has spent decades tending to a small memorial garden on her property. She says that on quiet summer nights, she often hears faint singing, a low, melodic hymn drifting through the cornfields. "It's not scary," she told a reporter. "It's peaceful, like they're reminding me they're still here and that they're okay." For the people of Gettysburg, the ghosts aren't an intrusion. They're part of the community's heartbeat, reminders that freedom carries a cost no monument can ever fully repay. History's echo and America's soul. What makes Gettysburg different from other haunted places isn't just the number of ghost stories, it's the meaning behind them. Every shadow, every whisper, every unexplained sound seems to carry the weight of the nation's struggle, not for conquest, but for identity. The Civil War tore America apart, but Gettysburg became the place where it began to heal. It's where Lincoln spoke of a new birth of freedom. It's where enemies met not as monsters, but as men fighting for what they believed to be right. That's why when visitors feel chills on their skin or hear phantom bugles in the wind, it doesn't feel like fear. It feels like remembrance. The spirits of Gettysburg aren't trapped. They're guarding the story. The sacred silence. At dawn, when the sun spills over the ridge and light touches the bronze figures of soldiers frozen in eternal watch, a strange peace settles over the land. The battlefield is quiet,